A man at the apex of his career, with a world of wealth within reach, decided to treat his young mistress to a weekend of unparalleled luxury. He booked the presidential suite at the St. George Royal Hotel, the city's most exclusive five-star establishment, a monument to a lifetime of power and money. He believed he had it all planned. A perfect escape, a secret safe behind soundproofed walls. He was convinced his wife, a discreet, beautiful woman he privately viewed as little more than a lovely ornament for his home, would never find out. But he made one fatal mistake, one colossal miscalculation. Donovan Steele directed his driver to the wrong hotel. He walked straight into the arms of his lover for a weekend of sin, unknowingly entering the very heart of his wife's domain and marching headlong toward his own spectacular ruin. Donovan Steele adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection staring back from the polished obsidian of his corner office window. 45 stories below, New York City sprawled out like a circuit board, a complex network of power and money that he, Donovan Steele, Senior Vice President of Steele and Associates Capital, had mastered. He was a king contemplating his dominion. His suit was custom-tailored on Fifth Avenue. The watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, and the car awaiting him downstairs was a midnight blue Rolls-Royce Ghost. These were not mere possessions. They were statements of his success, testaments to his ruthless climb up the corporate ladder. His life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. His penthouse on the Upper East Side was featured in architectural magazines. His 2 children were enrolled in the most exclusive private schools money could buy. And then there was his wife, Genevieve. Beautiful, elegant, from a prominent family, though one he always privately considered old money, new poverty. She was the perfect corporate spouse, running the household with silent efficiency, hosting impeccable dinners, and never questioning his long nights at the office. For 15 years, she had been a constant, predictable, and, if he was honest with himself, rather dull part of his perfect life. He saw her as a valuable asset, like a blue-chip stock paying reliable, if unexciting, dividends. A discreet knock on the mahogany door pulled him from his reverie. "Come in," he said, his voice soft and authoritative. The door opened to reveal Skylar Hayes. She was 26, with eyes the color of whiskey, and a cascade of honey blonde hair that fell over her shoulders. She was a junior analyst in the Mergers and Acquisitions department, intelligent enough to be interesting, but not so ambitious as to be a threat. She was in every way the antithesis of Genevieve. Where Genevieve was classic elegance and silent reserve, Skylar was vibrant, demanding, and thrillingly transparent in her admiration for his power and wealth. She closed the door softly behind her, a playful smile on her lips. "All set for this weekend, boss?" she purred, leaning against his desk. The scent of her expensive perfume, a gift from him, filled the air. "Everything is arranged to perfection," Donovan said, a look of self-satisfaction on his own lips. He walked over to her, placing his hands on her waist. The presidential suite at the St. George Royal, chilled champagne, a private dinner reservation at the chef's table, and a weekend where your only job is to enjoy. Skylar's eyes widened. The St. George Royal? Donovan, that place is legendary. I thought it was impossible to get a suite there on such short notice. "For most people it is," he said, enjoying the look of awe on her face. "But the Steele name still opens doors, darling. I made one call to the concierge, mentioned a potential corporate account, and they practically rolled out the red carpet." He felt a familiar surge of pride. This was his power, the ability to bend the world to his will with a single phone call. He had told Genevieve he was flying to Zurich for an emergency banking conference. It was the perfect lie, plausible, bearing an air of importance, and requiring him to be completely unreachable. He had even prepared a briefcase with fake financial reports, a piece of theater he found amusing. Genevieve had packed his bag, as always, with a placid, unquestioning expression. She even reminded him to take his blood pressure medication. The irony was delicious. "And Genevieve?" Skylar asked, her voice a soft whisper, a hint of insecurity clouding her features. Donovan made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "She thinks I'll be negotiating with Swiss bankers all weekend. She's probably planning her schedule for the charity gala or discussing flower arrangements with the gardener. Her world is small, contained. She wouldn't suspect a thing." He truly believed it. Genevieve lived in a golden cage he had built for her. She had her charities, her luncheons, her book club with other society wives. He funded it all, of course, providing her a generous allowance that kept her comfortable and, he assumed, content. He had convinced himself that her lack of ambition was a sign of her satisfaction, not a sign of something hidden. She was a relic, a beautiful woman from a bygone era who didn't understand the blood and sweat of modern ambition. She had no idea how the real world, the world he dominated, worked. "Good," Schuyler sighed, relaxing into his embrace. "I want you all to myself." "You'll have me," he promised, kissing her deeply. The thrill of the illicit, the sheer audacity of it all, was intoxicating. He was Donovan Steele. He made the rules. This weekend wasn't just about pleasure. It was a celebration of his own untouchable status. He was taking his mistress to the most opulent hotel in the city, a place synonymous with the established elite, and he was doing it right under his wife's nose. The pure arrogance of the act was half the fun. As he held Schuyler, the image of Genevieve quietly folding his shirts and placing them in his suitcase flashed into his mind. He felt a fleeting, almost imperceptible prick of something, not guilt, but a faint unease. He dismissed it instantly. It was just the last vestige of a conventional conscience, and it no longer served him. The Rolls-Royce Ghost glided to a silent stop beneath the ornate wrought iron and glass marquee of the St. George Royal Hotel. A doorman, dressed in an impeccable dark green uniform with gold epaulets, moved with expert grace to open Donovan's door before he was even aware they had arrived. "Welcome to the St. George Royal, Mr. Steele," the doorman said, his voice a deferential murmur. He recognized Donovan, or at least he recognized the car and the suit. That was all that mattered. Donovan stepped onto the granite curb, feeling the familiar sense of arrival that came with entering such an establishment. This was his natural habitat. He wasn't a guest here. He was a member of the class of people places like this were built for. Schuyler emerged from the other side, wide-eyed as she took in the hotel's facade, a Beaux-Arts architectural masterpiece of limestone carvings, grand arches, and towering columns. She looked momentarily overwhelmed, a small-town girl in the land of giants. Donovan found it endearing. He took her arm, his touch firm and reassuring. "Try to look like you belong," he murmured, with a condescending smile. Her brief insecurity vanished, replaced by a determined spark in her eyes. She lifted her chin, squeezed his arm, and together they swept through the revolving brass doors. The lobby was breathtaking, a cathedral of wealth. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, adorned with a magnificent fresco of classical gods lounging on clouds. A colossal crystal chandelier, rumored to have been salvaged from a French palace, hung in the center, casting a warm golden light over everything. The floors were a checkerboard of Italian marble, polished to a mirror sheen. The air was thick with the scent of fresh lilies and old money. The hushed sounds of quiet conversation, the distant clinking of glasses from the lobby bar, and the soft notes of a live pianist created a symphony of refined tranquility. Donovan strode confidently toward the front desk, a long, imposing counter of polished mahogany. A woman with an elegant chignon and a welcoming smile immediately gave them her full attention. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the St. George Royal." "Donovan Steele," he announced, placing his American Express Centurion black card on the counter. "I have a reservation for the presidential suite." The receptionist's professional smile did not waver, but Donovan saw a flash of heightened respect in her eyes. The presidential suite was not just a room, it was a statement. It was reserved for royalty, heads of state, and titans of industry. "Of course, Mr. Steele. We have been expecting you," she said, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. "Everything is in order. Your luggage will be brought up immediately. We've also taken the liberty of chilling a bottle of Dom Perignon 2008 for your arrival." "Excellent," Donovan said with a perfunctory nod as his only acknowledgement. He turned to Schuyler, who was trying hard to look indifferent, but failing to hide her euphoria. She was subtly taking a photo of the chandelier with her phone. He gently lowered her hand. "No photos, darling," he murmured. "It's tacky. You're not a tourist." She flushed slightly but put the phone away. "Right, sorry. It's just amazing." A bellman, an older man with a perfectly straight back and a discreet demeanor, appeared at their side. "Mr. Steele, if you will follow me, I will escort you to your suite." They followed him through the expansive lobby, their footsteps muffled softly on the marble. They passed elegantly dressed guests and a silent army of staff who seemed to move with quiet, synchronized purpose. The elevator was a wood-paneled jewel box with a plush velvet bench. As it ascended smoothly, the bellman spoke in a low, respectful tone. "The presidential suite is located on the penthouse level, sir. It has its own private elevator key for absolute discretion." He handed Donovan a heavy gold-plated keycard. "You will have a dedicated butler, Mr. Henderson, at your 24-hour service. He is awaiting you upstairs." "Very good," Donovan replied dryly. The elevator doors opened directly into a private foyer. Rich, dark wood double doors stood before them. The bellman opened them and stepped aside with a flourish. The suite was even more spectacular than Donovan had imagined. It was less a hotel room and more a sprawling apartment. The living area featured floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 180-degree panoramic view of the city skyline and the park below. A grand piano sat in one corner, a fully stocked bar in another. The furnishings were a mix of antique pieces and modern design, all upholstered in cream, gold, and royal blue velvets and silks. Skylar let out a gasp, dropping Donovan's arm and spinning in the center of the room. "Donovan, this is bigger than my entire apartment building," he chuckled, a rich, self-satisfied sound. "This, my dear, is how the other half lives. No, wait. This is how the other 1% lives." The bellman gave them a brief tour: the formal dining room, the study, the master bedroom with its four-poster bed, and a bathroom that was a marble sanctuary, complete with a sauna and a jacuzzi tub overlooking the city. After the bellman was generously tipped and departed, Donovan moved to the bar and poured 2 glasses of the chilled Dom Perignon. He handed one to Skylar, who was standing by the massive window, mesmerized by the view. "A toast," he said, clinking his glass against hers, "to a perfect weekend." "To us," she replied, her eyes bright with adoration. They sipped the expensive champagne, bubbling on their tongues. Donovan felt invincible. Everything was perfect. Every detail had been managed, every contingency planned. In this suite, high above the world, he was untouchable. He had successfully compartmentalized his life. The beautiful wife in the Upper East Side penthouse, the exciting mistress in this palace in the sky. He believed he was in total control of his universe, a master puppet master pulling all the right strings. He had no way of knowing that one of those strings, one he had long considered cut and forgotten, was attached to the very foundation of the building he was standing in. The first day was a blur of hedonistic perfection. They ordered room service from a seemingly limitless menu. They lounged in plush bathrobes and made full use of the suite's lavish amenities. Donovan felt a deep sense of contentment. He had earned this. The stress of multi-billion-dollar deals and market fluctuations faded against such absolute comfort. That night, they dined at the chef's table, the hotel's 3 Michelin-starred restaurant. The maitre d' greeted Donovan by name, seating them at the best table in the house, a secluded corner banquette overlooking the restaurant's private garden. The meal was an elaborate performance of culinary art. Course after course arrived, each more exquisite than the last. Donovan ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than Skylar's monthly rent, and savored the way her eyes widened when he told her the price. He was exhibiting his power for her, and she was the perfect audience. All evening, he regaled her with stories of his corporate triumphs, of deals he had closed and rivals he had crushed. He painted himself as a modern-day titan, and she listened with rapt attention, her hand resting on his thigh under the table. He felt more potent, more alive than he had in years. This was the validation he craved, the adoration his wife Genevieve had never quite provided. Genevieve's admiration had always been quiet, discreet. It was the serene approval of a partner, not the breathless devotion of a worshipper. The next morning, Donovan woke late. The sun streamed in through a gap in the heavy silk draperies. Skylar was still sleeping, her blonde hair fanned out over the ridiculously high thread count pillows. He slipped out of bed, feeling rested and content. He decided to take a steam bath in the marble restroom before ordering breakfast. Stepping out of the steam shower, he grabbed one of the thick, heavy robes hanging on a heated towel rack. It was impossibly soft, made of the finest Egyptian cotton. He pulled it on and belted it, his eyes scanning his reflection in the anti-fog mirror. It was then he noticed it. On the lapel of the robe, embroidered in a subtle, elegant silver thread, was a monogram. It was a G intertwined with a V. GV. He frowned, tracing the letters with his finger. What did it stand for? He vaguely recalled the hotel manager's name being mentioned. Du Bois, perhaps? Was it for the hotel's founding family? It seemed plausible. This hotel was steeped in old-world European tradition. Still, it was an oddly specific detail. He shrugged. It was just a monogram. He returned to the main suite, the robe cinched tight, and called his butler, Mr. Henderson, to arrange breakfast. While he waited, his eyes wandered around the room, now settling on the smaller details he had missed in his initial awe. He noticed the stationery on the mahogany desk, thick, cream-colored cardstock. He picked up a sheet. In the upper corner, engraved in the same elegant script as the monogram, were the intertwined initials. A faint, unidentifiable unease began to stir in the pit of his stomach. It was like hearing a single sour note in an otherwise perfect symphony. When Mr. Henderson arrived with a cart laden with their breakfast, smoked salmon, truffle scrambled eggs, fresh pastries, and silver pots of coffee, Donovan decided to ask. "Mr. Henderson," he began, trying to sound casual, "I was admiring the hotel's branding. These initials," he said, pointing to the stationery. "GV. Are they for the hotel's founder?" The butler, a man whose face was a mask of professional discretion, paused for a split second. "The monogram represents the ownership, sir. It has been the hotel's mark for a very long time." The answer was polite, professional, and told him absolutely nothing. The slight hesitation, however, did not escape Donovan. He was a man who made his living reading people. He could spot a bluff across a boardroom table. The butler was being evasive. "I see," Donovan said, dropping the subject, but he couldn't drop the thought. As he ate breakfast, the letters resonated in his mind. G.V., G.V. The familiarity was maddening. It tickled the edge of his memory, a name, a place he couldn't quite pin down. He thought of Genevieve. Her maiden name was Vaughn, Genevieve Vaughn, G.V. The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. He actually put down his coffee cup with a clatter. It couldn't be. It was an absurd coincidence. Her family had been wealthy, yes, but they had lost the bulk of their fortune generations ago. Her father, William, had been a quiet, unassuming man who had passed away a decade ago, leaving Genevieve a modest inheritance that Donovan, of course, had absorbed into his own portfolio and managed for her. He remembered William as a gentleman of a past age, always talking about standards and legacy, but seemingly possessing little real substance. He had owned a few small boutique hotels, Donovan recalled, but nothing on the scale of the St. George Royal Hotel. No, it was impossible. A ridiculous, paranoid leap of logic. There must be hundreds of names that fit those initials. Grant, Vance, Duke, all far more likely. He looked at Skylar, who was happily taking a photo of her aesthetically arranged breakfast plate for her social media. She was oblivious to his internal turmoil. "Everything all right, Donovan? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, finally looking up from her phone. "Fine," he snapped, his tone sharper than he intended. "Just thinking about the markets." He forced himself to relax. He was being an idiot. He was on the cusp of a perfect weekend, and he was letting a stupid monogram spook him. He was Donovan Steele. He was in control. This was his world, his hotel, his weekend. The initials were a coincidence, nothing more. But for the rest of the day, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He started seeing the monogram everywhere, on the tiny silver sugar tongs, on the leather-bound room service menu, in the corner of the linen napkins. Each time he saw it, the image of his wife's calm, serene face popped into his mind. The woman he thought he knew so well. The woman he had dismissed as simple and predictable. The golden cage he had built for her suddenly seemed less like a prison and more like a fortress, one he had never bothered to look inside. The unsettling thought crept in uninvited. What if he didn't know his wife at all? For their final night, Donovan had planned to recapture the magic of the first. He made another reservation at the chef's table, this time requesting the chef's tasting menu with premium wine pairings. He was determined to shake off the strange paranoia that had clung to him since the morning. He would drown his disquiet in vintage Bordeaux and reassert his control. He and Skylar dressed. He wore a sharp, custom-made dark suit, and Skylar wore a stunning, backless red dress he had bought her. As they stood before the mirror, he felt a sense of calm return. They looked like a power couple. They belonged here. The monogram was a phantom, an invention of an overworked imagination. They descended to the restaurant. The private elevator delivered them once more into the world of hushed elegance. The maitre d', a polished Frenchman named Jean-Luc, greeted him with an even warmer smile than the night before. "Mr. Steele, a pleasure to welcome you back. Your table is ready. The chef is very excited to present tonight's menu." They were led to the same secluded banquette. Donovan settled into the plush velvet. The familiar setting reassured him. He ordered a bottle of Krug to start, a celebratory gesture meant to banish the last of his foolish fears. "You know," Skylar said, leaning forward and placing her hand over his, "this has been the most incredible weekend of my life. I feel like a princess." "You deserve it," Donovan said, his confidence restored. He had been ridiculous. This was his life. He had made this happen. The first few courses were sublime, a delicate vichyssoise of oysters, followed by seared scallops with a citrus foam. The conversation was light, and Skylar's laughter was like music, erasing the last of his misgivings. He was about to raise his glass to toast their future when he noticed a subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. A quiet energy, a ripple of tension, was spreading from the entrance. The staff, usually the picture of professional calm, seemed to stand a little straighter. Jean-Luc, the maitre d', was speaking in a low, urgent tone to a man in a dark suit wearing a security earpiece. Donovan watched with mild curiosity. "Looks like some important guest is arriving," he commented to Skylar. A moment later, Jean-Luc began moving toward their table. His expression, a carefully constructed mask of apology and deference, looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Mr. Steele," he began, his voice low. "Is there a problem?" Donovan asked, a note of irritation in his voice. Before Jean-Luc could reply, the source of the commotion became evident. A small group of people had entered the restaurant and were now standing near the entrance, surveying the room. At the head of the group was a woman. Donovan's blood ran cold. The champagne flute in his hand suddenly felt heavy, his fingers numb. It was Genevieve. This was not the Genevieve he had left at home, the woman in cashmere cardigans and discreet pearls. This was an entirely different creature. She wore an incredibly sharp, dark navy pantsuit that accentuated her tall, slender figure. Her hair, usually in a soft style, was styled in a sleek, severe cut that framed a face set with an expression of icy calm and absolute authority. Her only jewelry was a pair of large diamond studs that shone like chips of ice. She was flanked by two men. One was an elderly, distinguished gentleman with silver hair and sharp eyes, a man Donovan recognized with a jolt of horror. Elias Sterling, the legendary and notoriously ruthless corporate attorney who had been a close friend of Genevieve's father. The other was the hotel's general manager, a man Donovan recognized from the hotel brochure photos. They stood slightly behind her, like loyal lieutenants attending their general. Skylar, following Donovan's frozen gaze, turned. "Donovan, who is that? Do you know her? She looks a little like your—" Her voice trailed off as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. Genevieve's eyes swept the room, calm and methodical, before settling directly on their table. There was no shock in her gaze, no surprise, only a cold, deliberate recognition. It was the look of a predator who had finally located its prey. The entire restaurant had fallen silent. Diners were frozen, forks halfway to their mouths, their quiet conversations dead. The only sound was the soft click of Genevieve's heels on the marble floor as she began to walk toward them. It was the longest walk of Donovan's life. Every step echoed in the cavernous silence, a drumbeat marking the seconds until his world collapsed. His mind raced, trying to form a lie, an explanation, an escape route, but there was none. The carefully constructed walls of his double life were not just cracking, they were vaporizing before his eyes. He looked at Skylar, whose face had gone pale, her red lipstick smile frozen into a grimace of terror. He looked at the other diners, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity, and then back to his wife, who was now only a few feet away. In her eyes, he did not see the wounded spouse he might have expected. He saw a stranger. He saw a queen who had come to claim her throne, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was nothing more than an intruder in her kingdom. Genevieve stopped beside their table. She did not look at Skylar. Her full, cold, undivided attention was on Donovan. The scent of her perfume, a subtle, expensive fragrance he hadn't smelled on her in years, reached him. It was sharp and clean, like winter air. "Donovan," she said. Her voice was perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice she used when giving instructions to staff, calm and final. "I believe you are in my seat." The statement hung in the air, a masterpiece of double meaning. Donovan stared up at her, his mouth dry. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. The carefully curated persona of Donovan Steele, the master of the universe, was shattering like cheap glass. "Genevieve," he stammered, his mind a blank slate of panic. What are you doing here? I thought you were back in New York. The charity gala." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "I canceled. Something more important required my attention." Her gaze finally flickered to Skylar, a quick, dismissive look that took in the expensive dress and the terrified expression. She looked at her not as a rival, but as one might look at a piece of furniture that is out of place. "And I see you brought a guest." Skylar shrank in her seat, looking up at Donovan with pleading, frightened eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Genevieve returned her attention to Donovan. "I must say, Donovan, I'm impressed. The presidential suite, the chef's table, you have expensive taste. It's a comfort to know you appreciate the family business." The family business. The words hit him like a physical blow, connecting the awful dots that had been tormenting him all day. The monogram. GV, Genevieve Vaughn. I don't understand, he managed to say, though the truth was crashing down on him with the force of a tsunami. "Allow me to clarify," Genevieve said, her voice lowering slightly, becoming even more precise. Each word was a carefully honed blade. "My father, William Vaughn, founded the Vaughn Hotel Group 60 years ago. His first hotel was a small country inn, but he was a brilliant man. He built an empire piece by piece with his own two hands. The St. George Royal Hotel was his masterpiece, the jewel in his crown. When he died, he left his entire controlling interest, all of it, to me." She paused, letting the information settle. The entire restaurant was listening, captivated by the real-life drama unfolding before them. "For 10 years, she continued, "I allowed a hand-picked board of directors, chosen by my father, to manage the company's day-to-day operations. I preferred a quiet life. I wanted to raise my children. I wanted to be a wife. I trusted that the world my father built was in good hands, and I trusted my husband. Her eyes locked with his, and for the first time he saw a flash of the immense pain he had caused her, but it was immediately suppressed, replaced by a steely will. But recently, I decided it was time to take a more active role. As of last Monday's annual shareholders meeting, I dissolved the board and assumed my rightful position. I am the sole acting chairman of the Vaughn Hotel Group, which owns this hotel and 117 others worldwide. The monogram you've been seeing everywhere isn't for some viscount. It stands for Genevieve Vaughn. Welcome to my hotel, Donovan. The silence in the room was absolute. Donovan felt the blood drain from his face. He was not a king in conquered territory. He was a fool who had hosted a party in the lion's den without knowing the lion was home. Genevieve then directed her gaze toward Schuyler. Ms. Hayes, isn't it? Schuyler nodded, trembling. You are an analyst at Steele & Associates Capital. I believe sleeping with a senior vice president, your direct superior, is a flagrant violation of your firm's ethics clause, not to mention a grave lack of judgment. Consider your employment terminated. Mr. Sterling has already contacted your firm's head of human resources and its board of directors. I wouldn't bother going into the office on Monday. Schuyler let out a small, choked cry. Her dream weekend had become a career-ending nightmare. Finally, Genevieve turned to the man she had been married to for 15 years. As for you, Donovan, our joint bank accounts, which hold my family's trust funds you so generously offered to manage for me, have been frozen. The locks on the Upper East Side penthouse have been changed. Your belongings are being boxed up as we speak and will be shipped to your office. Don't bother going home. You are no longer welcome there. She pulled a single document from her clutch and placed it on the table between Donovan's plate and his wineglass. These are the divorce papers drafted by Mr. Sterling. My terms are non-negotiable. You will find that I have been meticulously documenting your indiscretions for the past 3 years. You will sign them. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back, and you will not see our children without my express, supervised consent. If you fight me, I will use the full weight of my resources to destroy not only your career, but your very name. I will ensure the name Steele is synonymous with humiliation and failure in every financial circle in the world. Is that clear? Donovan could only stare at her, speechless. The woman he had condescended to, underestimated, and dismissed as a decorative object had just systematically dismantled his entire life in under 3 minutes in a public forum with the cold precision of a surgeon. With that, she turned away. Jean-Luc, she said to the maitre d', who stood pale and rigid. Please ensure Mr. Steele's guest is escorted off the premises and present Mr. Steele with the full bill for his stay. He will be paying on his personal card. She gave Donovan one last lingering look. It was a look of finality, of an old chapter closing and a new one beginning. There was no hatred in it, only a deep, chilling indifference. Then, flanked by her attorney and the hotel general manager, Chairman Genevieve Vaughn turned and walked out of the restaurant, her posture perfect, her control absolute, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the life she had just incinerated. For a long moment after Genevieve's departure, Donovan remained frozen, a statue of shock and humiliation. The silence in the restaurant finally broke with a choked sob from Schuyler. She shoved her chair back, her face a mess of smeared mascara and disbelief. My job, she whispered, looking at Donovan as if seeing him for the first time, not as a titan of industry, but as the architect of her ruin. You said everything was under control. I thought it was. He stammered the words, feeling them like ash in his mouth. 2 discreet but firm security guards materialized at their table. Jean-Luc, the maitre d', approached, his face a mask of professional regret. Miss, he said softly to Schuyler, if you would kindly accompany us. Schuyler looked desperately from the guards to Donovan, but he offered no help. He couldn't even meet her eyes. Humiliated, she grabbed her small clutch purse and allowed herself to be led away, her red dress a slash of shame against the muted tones of the restaurant. The moment she was gone, Jean-Luc placed a leather folio with the account on the table. Your check, Mr. Steele. Donovan stared at it, opening it apathetically. The figure inside was astronomical. The suite, the room service, the vintage wines, the tasting menus. It was a sum that would make most people gasp, but to him, it should have been trivial. He fumbled for his wallet, his hands shaking slightly. He handed Jean-Luc the black card. The maitre d' returned a minute later, his expression even more pained. My apologies, Mr. Steele. The card has been declined. What? Donovan scoffed. That's impossible. Try it again. We have, sir, 3 times. It appears the account has been suspended. Of course, the joint accounts. Genevieve hadn't just frozen them. She had likely had his supplementary cards canceled. He fumbled for another card, a corporate visa. "Try this one." Jean-Luc returned again, shaking his head slightly. "Also declined, sir." Blood rushed to Donovan's face. The other diners were no longer pretending not to look. Their whispers were a low hum of judgment. He was no longer one of them. He was the evening's entertainment. "This is ridiculous. There must be a mistake," Donovan bellowed, his voice rising. The general manager, the same man who had flanked Genevieve, walked over to the table. His demeanor was no longer deferential. It was cold, official. "Mr. Steele, perhaps you have another method of payment? If not, we will have to consider this a matter of theft of services and involve the authorities." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Donovan Steele, a man who moved billions of dollars before breakfast, could not pay his hotel bill. The humiliation was absolute. He had no cash, no working cards. He was trapped. Mr. Sterling, Genevieve's lawyer, reappeared at the edge of the dining room. He walked over to the manager, said a few words quietly, and then addressed Donovan. "Mr. Steele," Sterling said, his voice like gravel. "Mrs. Steele, that is, Ms. Vaughn, has graciously offered to settle your account. It will be deducted from whatever minimal settlement you might have expected in your divorce. Consider it her final gift to you." He slid the divorce papers closer to Donovan. "I suggest you sign them now." Defeated, Donovan took the pen. His signature, usually a bold, assured stroke, was a pathetic, trembling scribble. He had been outmaneuvered, completely and absolutely. "Now," the general manager said, his voice hard. "You have 10 minutes to collect your belongings and vacate the premises. Security will escort you." The walk of shame from the restaurant, through the grand lobby, and up the elevator was excruciating. Every glance from a guest, every sidelong look from a staff member felt like a physical blow. The deference and respect were gone, replaced by disdain and cold indifference. In the suite, his things had already been carelessly thrown into his suitcase by a stony-faced butler. 10 minutes later, Donovan Steele stood on the curb outside the St. George Royal Hotel, the same spot where he had arrived feeling like a king barely 24 hours before. The doorman who had greeted him so warmly now looked right through him. His Rolls-Royce was gone, towed, he surmised, as it was registered in Genevieve's name. It began to drizzle, a cold, miserable rain. He tried to call an Uber, but his app was linked to his canceled cards. He stood there, a man in a $1,000 suit with a useless phone and an empty wallet, as taxis and limousines zipped past. He was stranded. He started to walk, the drizzle soaking the jacket of his thin suit. He had nowhere to go. His home was no longer his. His office would be a place of shame. His friends, he knew, would side with power and old money. They would side with Genevieve Vaughn. The news of this spectacular humiliation would travel through their circles at the speed of light. He found a payphone, a relic of another era, and used the few coins in his pocket to call his only remaining ally, a junior partner at his firm named Frank. "Frank, it's Donovan. I'm in trouble. Real trouble." He tried to explain, but his story came out as an incoherent, panicked ramble. Frank listened, and when Donovan finished, there was a long pause. "Donovan," Frank said, his voice tight, "I just got an email from the board. It's about you. They're calling an emergency meeting Monday morning. Donovan, they're invoking the morality clause. Genevieve's lawyer sent them a full dossier. Photos, bank statements, everything. They're going to fire you." The receiver slipped from Donovan's numb fingers, clattering against the metal of the phone booth. It was over. Everything. In a single night, he had lost his wife, his children, his home, his mistress, his job, and his fortune. Genevieve hadn't just beaten him. She had erased him. He looked up toward the glittering penthouse suite of the St. George Royal Hotel, a beacon of power high above the city. He had flown too close to the sun, not realizing the sun was his wife, and now he was in freefall, with no land in sight. 6 months later, the world had moved on, and Donovan Steele was left behind. The name that once commanded respect on the NYSE floor was now a whispered warning, a ghost story told to young, ambitious associates about the dangers of arrogance. As Genevieve had promised, her victory was not just a defeat for him, it was a complete and total erasure. The emergency board meeting at Steele & Associates Capital had been a formality, a quick and clinical execution. His office was cleared out before he had a chance to process his termination. The morality clause, a piece of corporate text he had never paid attention to, had become the guillotine that severed him from his life's work. His new reality was a suffocating mantle of anonymity and failure. The Upper East Side penthouse was replaced by a third-floor walk-up in a distant borough, a place that smelled of damp and his neighbors cooking. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had offered panoramic city views were now a single dirty pane of glass overlooking a graffiti-covered brick wall. The silence of his old life, a silence of refined luxury, was replaced by the constant noise of sirens, arguing neighbors, and the rattling groan of the old radiator. He sold the Patek Philippe, then the cufflinks, then the art collection he was so proud of. Each sale was a small death, eroding the man he used to be until only an empty shell remained. He now worked at a small, anonymous financial services firm called Apex Solutions, a name so generic it was insulting. His corner office was a cramped cubicle under the glare of flickering fluorescent lights. He, who once moved markets with a single phone call, now spent his days performing tedious data entry and compliance checks, work formerly done by interns. His boss was a man 15 years his junior, a smug, ambitious graduate who treated Donovan with barely veiled contempt, fully aware of who he used to be and reveling in his downfall. Sometimes he saw young women in the office, bright and eager, who reminded him of Skylar, and he felt a surge of bitter resentment. It was not remorse for her ruined career, but anger that his appetites had led him here. His nights were the worst. The profound isolation was a physical presence in his small apartment. He tried calling old friends, the men he had shared cigars and 100-year-old whiskey with. The calls went unanswered. The few who picked up were brief and cold, making excuses before quickly ending the conversation. He was a liability, a social pariah. He was no longer a member of the club, just a man in a cheap apartment, haunted by the ghost of his former life, drinking self-pity like poison every night with cheap whiskey. While Donovan sank into the mire of his own making, Genevieve ascended. In taking up her role as chairman of the Vaughn Hotel Group, she was not just competent, she was formidable. The years of quiet observation, of being underestimated and dismissed, had forged her into a shrewd and decisive leader. She saw things the old board, composed of men comfortable with the status quo, had missed. One afternoon, in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Vaughn Tower, she was presenting her signature proposal, the Vaughn Green Initiative. It was a decade-long, multi-million-dollar plan to make the entire hotel chain carbon neutral, focusing on sustainable sourcing, renewable energy, and community investment. A portly, silver-haired board member named Gerald Campos, a holdover from the old guard and a friend of her father, cleared his throat condescendingly. Genevieve, with all due respect, this is a noble sentiment, but the figures are idealistic. The initial investment will cut into our profit margins for years. Our shareholders expect dividends, not ethical posturing. Genevieve did not flinch. She held his gaze with her calm, steady eyes. Thank you, Gerald. I value your traditional perspective. The word traditional was spoken with surgical precision, making it sound synonymous with outdated. She pressed a button, and the screen behind her filled with complex charts and data projections. What you call ethical posturing, Gerald, I call future-proofing. Our key demographic, travelers under the age of 40 with considerable spending power, are increasingly making decisions based on corporate ethics and sustainability. This is not an expense. It is an investment in our brand's relevance for the next 50 years. My projections show that while we will see a 5% dip in net profits for the first 18 months, the positive press, increased brand loyalty, and government tax incentives will lead to a projected 15% growth in market share within 5 years. We won't just be a luxury brand, we will be the ethical luxury brand. She paused, letting her words sink in. My father built this company on quality and legacy. This is the legacy for the 21st century. The motion stands. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Gerald Campos sank into his chair, defeated. From a corner, Elias Sterling watched, a rare smile of pride on his face. The sleeping titan had truly awakened. Genevieve's new life wasn't just in the boardroom. The Upper East Side penthouse, once a cold showroom of Donovan's success, was transformed. It was now a home filled with warmth and laughter. She was there for her children, truly present for the first time. She helped with homework, attended school plays, and had long conversations about their hopes and fears. She was discovering the joy in the small, real moments she had missed while playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. She wasn't just a chairman, she was a mother, a leader, a whole person finally living her own life on her own terms. On a crisp autumn evening, Donovan was walking home from the subway station, the collar of his thin coat pulled up against a biting wind. The city, which once felt like his kingdom, now felt alien and hostile. He stopped at a newsstand. The glossy glare of the magazines contrasted sharply with the gray pavement, and there she was. Her face was on the cover of Forbes. It was a stunning photograph. Genevieve stood on the balcony of the presidential suite at the St. George Royal Hotel, his suite, with the city lights twinkling behind her like a carpet of diamonds at her feet. She looked directly at the camera, an expression of serene power and unwavering confidence on her face. The headline was a coronation. Genevieve Vaughn, How the Quiet Heiress Reinvented a Global Empire. His hand trembled as he paid for the magazine. Back in the oppressive silence of his apartment, he sat under the single dim lamp and read the article. It was a hagiography, a brilliant tribute to her genius. It detailed her sustainability initiatives, her shrewd acquisitions of boutique hotel chains, her employee profit-sharing program. It quoted industry rivals offering grudging admiration. Then it came to the part about her personal life. Following an amicable divorce from her ex-husband, it read, Vaughn has focused on her children and her role as a transformative leader in the hospitality industry, proving that a new chapter can be the most rewarding. Amicable divorce. The word sparked a harsh, dry laugh in his throat. He wasn't a villain in her story. He wasn't even a footnote. He was a corrected typo, an inconvenient detail entirely edited out of the narrative. He let the magazine slip from his fingers. It fell to the floor, landing with Genevieve's triumphant face staring up at him. He had never seen her. He had truly looked at her every day for 15 years and only seen a reflection of his own success, a beautiful, passive accessory. He had not seen the sharp mind, the patient heart, and the core of Vaughn steel running through her veins. He had thought he was the master of his universe, a sun around which everything revolved, but he had only been a minor moon orbiting a star, and he had been foolish enough to think his own dim light was the source of all power. He stood up and walked to the window, staring at the dark, unforgiving brick wall that was his horizon. He imagined her standing in her office atop the Vaughn Tower, looking out over the endless, glittering expanse of the city, a city that was now hers to conquer. Up there, a new dawn had arrived for Genevieve Vaughn, bright and full of promise. For Donovan Steele, left in the darkness below, it was a permanent and profoundly deserved twilight. Donovan Steele learned the hardest lesson of all. The person you most underestimate may be the one holding all the cards. He saw his wife as part of the decor of his perfect life, only to discover she owned the entire building, and he was nothing more than a temporary guest who had overstayed his welcome. Genevieve's story is a powerful reminder that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the silent, patient force that waits for the perfect moment to reclaim its power. It is a story of justice, empowerment, and the spectacular consequences of betrayal. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.